Welcome into this edition of Inside Broncbuster Athletics. I'm Mike Pilosof. Greg Greathouse was so good a couple weeks ago that we figured we'd keep on the athletic training theme. So we bring in now the director of sports medicine at Siena Clinic here in Garden City. That's Steve Barrett, who's also the former head athletic trainer at Garden City Community College. So we appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Mike.
When I look at your background, and there's a long list that you've got as far as your career, but your initial, when you went from, you were at high school at TMP, and then you went to Creighton, and then you've got your degree in physical education, and it almost seemed like you were going to go into a teaching career at that point. Was that ever the goal, to be a teacher full-time?
It was at the beginning, and most of the athletic trainers worked in schools, and so you wanted to get a teaching degree to get a job, because most people didn't know what an athletic trainer was in 1980.
I still, to this point, don't think that they know what an athletic trainer is. I make that joke with Greg. What steered you in that direction as far as athletic training?
Well, Creighton, the year that I started, they hired their first certified athletic trainer. And so they were a Division I school that didn't have an athletic trainer. They had a team physician, but mostly the coaches took care of the kids. And so work study was available for this position, and so you're just looking down through the board, and you're like, hey, I can work in a gym. You know, student athletic trainer sounded a lot better than janitor and answering phones in the business department. So I applied. I was the very first one they accepted, the first certified athletic trainer to ever graduate from Creighton University. And my boss graduated from Indiana State, and there was only 9 programs at the graduate level in the United States at that time. Indiana State's 2 professors had written most of the books that I used in undergraduate, so that's where I went to graduate school.
Your story about landing the job here in Garden City, I heard it for the first time just a couple of days ago, but it is really interesting because Garden City was not the first school that really jumped on you when you graduated from Indiana State. You had a couple of other jobs, but then when you were applying for other jobs, there was a couple of schools right down the road in Dodge City before Dennis Perryman snagged you up over here.
Yeah, my brother-in-law lived in Garden City, and so he picked me up at the airport, and so I spent the night with him, and actually St. Mary's of the Plains paid for the plane ticket out here. And he just mentioned that, hey, they're building onto this gymnasium out there, and they built a training room, and you ought to take a look at it. And so my interview wasn't until like 10 o'clock in the morning at St. Mary's, and I tagged on Dodge City Community College, so I applied there too while I was over there. And I was just walking around this building, and Dennis Perryman came into work and said, hey, can I help you? Told him what I was doing, and he made me promise that I wouldn't accept one of those 2 jobs until I came and talked to him. And so when I came back over here at 7 or 8 o'clock that night, I had a job when I left the campus that night.
When you think back at it, the way it worked out, and obviously things work out the way they're going to work out anyway, but the way that did with Dennis, I don't know if he doubled your salary or whatever he did there. When you think back to how that happened, what's the memory of that? Like what stands out about just him, and obviously he's gone now, but about Dennis Perryman hiring you?
Well, I mean, the interview with Dennis, and he was the only one who interviewed me here, whereas they had a team at the other schools. You could tell his vision for this program. When I walked into the training room, the only thing that was in the training room was a countertop and an ice machine. There was no tables, and they were getting ready. I mean, 3 weeks from the day that I interviewed, you know, football was on campus ready to go. And so it turned out to be great. Dennis was probably my favorite boss, and his vision of what athletics should be and how they should be run, it was a good choice.
You made a lot of decisions when you were here. You were the head athletic trainer. One of those was hiring Greg Greathouse, who then eventually succeeded you when you left. So when you think back of your most memorable time in the 6 or 7 years that you were here working as the head athletic trainer, what would that be?
There was the coaching staff that I had to work with was fantastic, and they weren't used to having an athletic trainer, so it was actual easy, you know, transition, because everything you did was something that they had to do the year before I came. And so you know, the memorable parts are the kids, that not only the student athletic trainers but also the athletes that I had to work with. And Greg was obviously that first year, he was a football player, and I got to know him because he was wearing a cast at the time. And so, you know, I actually arrived, I mean, it was 3 or 5 days before football started, and you have to do physicals. Yeah, I had no supplies, 0 supplies. Dennis was like, oh, when you come here, our shop will build your tables. And, you know, so we were on folding tables for the first month. And, you know, Greg just slowly came into the training room, and we only had 5 that first year, and all 5 were recruited, you know, from campus students. The basketball coach had a manager, and so we picked up him. And then the next year we had 30. And every year after that, we started with around 30 kids. So,
from 87 to 93, you were the head athletic trainer here. 2010, so fast forward 2 decades, and you were inducted into the Broncbuster Athletic Association Hall of Fame. When you started in this profession, did you ever envision yourself reaching the pinnacle? And again, people will say, well, Broncbuster Athletic Association or Broncbuster Athletic Hall of Fame, what's the big deal? That's a huge deal. Did you ever envision making such a difference in this profession?
Never. Athletic trainers are always behind the scenes, and we always feel like if we don't get noticed, it's been a great day and a great game, because if people are watching you out on the field, it means some kid's hurt. So when you're behind the scenes, you never ever expect to be inducted into a Hall of Fame at any level.
You've always said your wife makes the joke is when she sees you at a game, most of the time she's seeing the backside of you, which I guess for an athletic trainer is pretty common.
Yeah, when you look at a lot of the pictures that, you know, we were digging through, a lot of them are my backside, kneeling over an athlete. So, yeah, that's common for our profession. 20
years you worked at Sandhill, and you got to work with Dr. Boffman, who passed away back in 2014. What was it like working with him, and what, even to this day, what does he mean to you?
Well, he came to Garden City the same year I did, 1987, and I was here for a few weeks, and it was after football practice. I was doing my injury reports, and it was 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and in walks this guy, and he shakes my hand, introduces himself, and tells me his background in sports medicine, and he's the new orthopedic surgeon in town. And at that time, we had a team physician that did a fantastic job, but he was a general surgeon. And Dr. Boffman became our team physician. He had a vision that, you know, not only the high school or the college athletes should have an athletic trainer, but the high school should also have that opportunity. And at that time, you know, I just hired Greg. Greg had graduated from Emporia State. He came back. He was the head of the Super Circuit Wellness Center here, and my assistant. And so it was a big change in my life, but I was still working 7 days a week, you know, 70 to 90 hours a week. So to go from that to an 8 to 5 job was appealing at that time. And, you know, we still had high schools bringing their kids to our training room on a daily basis. I mean, after I would get done with football practice, we'd come into the training room, there'd be 2 or 3 high school athletes that their coaches had brought in. And so we wanted to give them, and you know, my vision has always been that every high school needs to have an athletic trainer and somebody to be an advocate, because the coaches are so busy. They can't take care of an athlete, and especially at practice. You know, they have practice to run, and so the kid gets hurt, they put some ice on his ankle and leave him sitting on the sideline until his mom and dad comes and picks him up. And so the bigger schools have done that, and you know, it hasn't filtered down to the 4, 3, and 2A schools yet.
And you've basically overseen all of that during your time. There's a lot of schools that you oversee. In all the years that you've been doing this, you've been recognized nationally, you've been on the cover of national athletic training magazines. If you were just to narrow that down to the biggest accomplishment of your career, what would that be?
Having 2 great kids and now an awesome little grandson. Trying to keep a family in this profession. If you don't have a wife that likes sports, you're in trouble. And every coach will say the same thing. My wife, at the end of her workday, and she worked out here after the first 2 years that we moved here, she got a job at Garden City Community College, and that's part of our love for this campus. But she'd pick up the kids and bring them to the training room and bring them to practice. And they were with us at almost every game that I worked. And when you're the only athletic trainer and you have 17 varsity sports back then, we had tennis and wrestling and more sports than we have today, then, you know, if you don't see your kids during the workday, you're not going to see your kids because they're in bed by the time you get home.
You mentioned the football staff when you were here. One of those guys, Ron German, who I've heard so many stories about that guy. Legendary tales, by the way, whether you listen to you or Doyle McGraw. So give us your best Ron German story.
There's so many. Well, Ron was our assistant coach. At that time, he was our running backs coach. And we were out on the practice field, and he was frustrated with specifically how the backs were running and not hitting the hole hard, but more importantly, how the offensive line wasn't blocking for his running backs. And so he runs up to one of the linemen, and he grabs his helmet off of him, throws the helmet on himself, no pads, just in shorts and a t-shirt and a helmet. And so he runs a play as the running back, and the kids didn't block like he should have, and the defensive guys just kind of shoved him. And so he starts yelling at the defense, and he says, "You need to make a tackle just like you did the last time." And then so he started kicking the offensive lineman in the butts to get him to move forward and to give him a hole. And he did this for over a half hour, and they were tackling him to the ground.
No pads on.
No pads on. He just had a helmet on. That was it. And everybody, the entire team was around it. It was a great motivation. I knew why Ron German was a good high school and college football player at that time, and his size was not that great, but he was running through holes like, the best fullback in the whole world. And after practice, he was standing outside the training room and didn't know he was out there. He waited for all the kids to come out, and he came in, filled up the whirlpool full of ice and water, and he must have sat in there for a good hour. The next day he came in, I said, "How sore are you, Ron?" And he said, I'm fine. So
he's tough.
He's tough. At that time we had a lot of coaches that worked in the community that came out and coached, and Doyle and Ron were two of those, and their heart was in it. So it was fun, being part of those staffs at that time.
Lastly, and not that you're away from it now because you still deal with high schools, Garden City High School, some of the local surrounding high schools. What do you miss most about being in it every single day? Which you mentioned the 70 to 90 hours a week. I'm sure you don't miss that.
I don't miss that at all, but I miss the relationship that you have with the athletes and the coaches because you work with a specific team and these certain athletes. And at the high school level, they play 3 sports, so you get to know them. And as the director, you don't have that, so you're filling in for your staff and doing the administrative functions, but you don't have that one-on-one relationship that you have with your athletes like you have here at the college level or if you're working full-time at the high school level.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Mike.